Hi, I'm Sam Clift. Welcome to my channel. I combine art and mindset to really get the most out of your creativity in mind and body. On this channel, I upload tip videos and tutorials, and I have an art and mindset membership which has full tutorials and mindset support. In this video, I'm going to be talking about leopard fur. So using this leopard in the background, I'm just going to be showing you a little portion of how to create realistic fur, and I really hope you enjoy it. I'm going to start with a layer of luminance. So this is a wax-based pencil. I'm starting with the buff titanium. And the reason I'm doing this, there's quite a few reasons, but the main one is that you are able to use the slice tool if you need it, which is really handy. The slice tool, if you don't know what that is, this is the pen cutter slice tool. What you do is you scrape away, just demonstrate here. So you hold it to the side and just scrape away, and you can use this to add texture in, fur texture. You can add little flyaway hairs, you can add light over dark, but it works best if you have a base layer down. I did a little bit of an experiment where I had blank paper and just used the slice tool with, I think I just put a layer of black just to see what would happen if you scrape through to the paper, and it didn't really show up that well. And then I put a layer of polychromos down and it showed up a little bit, but the best one was the luminance because it's wax based and you've got something to scrape down to. The other thing that's really good about adding a base layer is that you're starting to get rid of the graininess and fill up the kind of troughs of the paper, the tooth of the paper. I'm not pressing very hard, I'm just doing big ovals just to get a few layers of this down. And the other thing is, if you're sitting looking at your drawing, which I've done on many occasions, and you don't really know where to start, just putting pencil to paper and getting this base layer down, you're not committing yourself to getting it wrong or worrying about what you're doing. You're just putting a base layer down and it just feels like you're starting, you're getting going. And getting started, I've just noticed a bit up here, is sometimes the hardest bit. So put a couple of layers of the buff titanium. You could use the white or any other colour really. And then what I'm going to do is start to add a layer of the burnt ochre, and I'm using ovals again. I'm just going to come down to where I've added the buff titanium, and I'm using a very different fur technique to what I'm used to, really, what I used to do. And I think this is working really well, actually. I'm starting to think about getting all of the colours in, getting the values in, so the lights and the darks, working out where everything is, mapping it all in, but really loosely, and then only putting details in the final layers. And that seems to be working, and it looks much more realistic, softer. It's softer on your hands, on your wrists. You don't feel like you're constantly doing that jerky movement, which is what I used to do. I used to put every fur stroke in about 40 times. And what you're doing with that is you're blending the pencil as you go with each layer, but it's quite a lot on the hands and wrists. And over the last year or so, I've really noticed that blending is the key. So if you can blend nice and smoothly, like I'm doing here, getting a flat edge on the edge of your pencil so that you can cover a lovely area evenly, then I think it works out much better. So just looking where everything is here, I am now going to map in where the spots are, because that's going to help me to work out where to go next. So I'm just looking at my reference photo. You don't need to copy them exactly, but what I have found is an animal with markings, it's a lot easier if you do follow a little bit more. You follow the pattern relatively closely. Every dot doesn't have to be exactly there, but what you'll find is some of the spots will create a fold, like here, and that's important to do because that's going to really add to the form and the texture of the animal. If I just put random spots anywhere and didn't really follow the reference photo, I wouldn't know where these folds would be. I would get lost quite easily. If I came back to this after a little bit of a break, I wouldn't know what I was doing next. So actually it does work out. So you can see there's a line here. I'm going to follow that down, and then there's a spot here. I think the thing that you don't really have to worry about is whether the spot is the exact same shape, but you do need to know which spot you're referring to so that you can work out where these creases are and where the shadows are and all that kind of thing. So I'm using the dark sepia because if you use the black, it's a lot more difficult to lift up if you make a bit of a mistake. And I'm just breaking up the edges slightly so that it looks like the fur is all lying on top of each other. That's quite important with patterns, that you don't just put a spot on and then looks like it's been stuck on. You need to see the little fur strokes going in and amongst so that the lighter hairs will show up over the top of dark. So just mapping in that one. There's one just below here, which is that kind of shape. So breaking up the edges using a combination of the fur technique and little scribbles. I can fill in the middle a little bit more because that's more of a solid colour, and we will be going back in with black just to make sure that everything makes sense. I'm just going to follow this line down now and then see where this is in relation to that one. So I'm just going to come down a little bit more, and there's two lined ones together. So breaking up the edges, and then there's one next to it. And then there's one underneath. So breaking up the edges with that. There are some defined lines here. And then there's quite a long one. Actually, it looks like two. They come down here and then step off. So because I've got these patterns in, I can kind of see where everything is. Now we've put that layer of burnt ochre in, it looks really light. So we can go back in with the burnt ochre. It's more orangey towards this part. There's a fold of the fur and that gets lighter, but there's more of an orange tone here. So I'm going to add more burnt ochre. I'm not pressing any harder. I'm just going over the same areas a few more times. Because if you push too hard, what you'll be doing is burnishing, which you don't want to do. You will end up flattening the tooth of the paper, and then you're not able to get more layers in, which is what you'll need to do to get all of these different colours in. I'm not really thinking too much about the direction of the fur, but I am thinking that it is kind of, it flows up that way and then along the body. So I'm not doing the opposite. I'm not doing it that way. I am thinking about it a little bit, adding more of this burnt ochre in here. And what I'm doing is going right up to the dark sepia and kind of blending the spots into the fur, because we are going to be adding black in a little bit. So that's going to make sense. Add a little bit of the burnt ochre there. And then coming next to the spots, there's a little bit of shadow. So I can just put that in. You can see that it's not completely uniform. It's not just one colour around the whole of the block. If you take it section by section, you can see these little colour changes, these little nuances in colour that are going to make for a much more interesting coat and a lot more realistic as well. So just going in with the burnt ochre a couple of times, couple of layers. I'm going over the top of the dark sepia, and what that will do is pick up a little bit of that pigment, and then I can use that as shadow. It's a little bit like using graphite. If you don't want to pick up the pigment, then always go from light to dark. But in this case, I'm just thinking that it would be quite nice to get a little bit of a shadow around, so I can use some of that pigment to my advantage and start adding it. Because we haven't used black, black smudges an awful lot more, so just be mindful of that. The dark sepia is a little bit lighter, a little bit more forgiving. It's usually why I put black in right at the end. I don't really add that until I have almost finished and I need to work out how dark to go. Don't be afraid of using black. Sometimes things are black, you know, they're really, there's no other colour for it. You can, I mean, with this, I'm adding, how many layers have we put down? So we've got the buff titanium, we've got the ochre, we've got the dark sepia, and we've got a few layers of each. We've not just got one layer. So it's not like I'm just laying black down, although I've got to say, I'm not sure I've ever, you know, people say black looks flat. I don't know, maybe it does if it's on its own. Maybe you don't get the opportunity with coloured pencils to just put one layer down. You end up putting quite a lot of layers down. And I imagine black, there are quite a few different colours that go into making black. I don't know. If you are worried about it looking flat, you can always add a little bit of colour over the top, a little bit of blue, or these kind of red colours, or burnt sienna, whatever you want. So you can see now I'm starting to create a little bit of a subtle change. There's a highlight going down there, so the light is going to be catching on it. It's just going to make it a little bit more interesting. I always add a little bit of that colour into the light just to tie it together, otherwise you're going to end up with a real contrast. By doing this method where you're not adding the fur texture at the beginning, you're actually just adding it at the end. And with this leopard, a lot of the times I've not even been using the fur technique at all. I've been using the slice tool to get the fur texture because I put that base layer down. So that's starting to look like it's got lots of different colours in. You can go in with the terracotta of the polychromos and just add a little bit of that. It's such a lovely colour, just to enhance that richness. And I am thinking, as I move on through the layers, a little bit more about the direction of the fur, but not loads. I'm not following every single one, I'm just following the main direction because it's curving around the body, and that's kind of what I'm doing. When you're looking at the reference photo, you're getting a feel for the shape of the animal, and where all the little curves are, where all the little shadows are. So I'm adding this terracotta. I want to add some of this into the light. I am going to use this fur technique, so little dashes across that lighter part just to tie it all in together. Otherwise it can look just like a stripe down the middle of this section, which we don't want. Blow away any fallout. What else can we add? I think a little bit more of the dark sepia next to these sections, and then what we'll do is we'll go in with the black and then balance everything out. You might need to add a little bit more shadow here and there. Just noticed here that it's a little bit darker than I've got it, so I'm just going to go back in with the terracotta and just add a few more layers of that. Really light hand still. If you're wanting a little bit more pigment laid down, don't press any harder, just go over the area a couple of times. You might not show up to begin with, but it will after a little while. It's these little nuances in colour that make all the difference. And what I found is, if you are finding it difficult to add colour, if you're really worried about picking the right colours, you might think, oh, I'll go in with a burnt sienna or a darker colour, and you end up going a little bit too red or a little bit too orangey, then I always find stick with the colour that you've got and then go over the top with a glazing colour like a warm grey 6 or a dark sepia. I'll show you here. And what you'll do is you'll end up just darkening, but you don't lose the colour underneath. Really light hand, small circles. You've stayed with that colour. It's underneath, but it's darkened it. Can you see that line? I use this all of the time. So if you're looking for a shadow, a subtle shadow without losing the texture or the colour underneath, then just use a glazing colour to darken everything up. You can always add a little bit of colour over the top I'm going to go in with the black now. I'm going to go in with two blacks, the Polychromos black and the Pablo's black. Sometimes I don't find that the Polychromos black is dark enough, but it's great for detail. So we've got a lovely hard lead here, and so we can use this to our advantage to get all of those little hairs, how they break up. And then I'm going to darken the whole thing with the Pablos, because they just don't go dark enough. And even if they do, what I found is they tend to sink into the paper a little bit, so you'll come back and you think, I darkened that as much as I could and it looks like it's lighter again. I don't know if that's just this paper I use or it's an illusion. I don't know, but I found using a combination of the blacks help it to stay nice and black. So thinking about those little details, they cross into the other hairs. Coming down with this one. Definitely a darker line here. Making sure that's not too uniform. Some areas are darker than others. This little one here. I'm just constantly looking at my reference photo just to see that I'm in the right place, on the right track. Up at the top, there were a few of these spots that were kind of in the sun, just at the top. And so I added a little bit of blue in there, just near the top. And although it's quite subtle, overall, that's going to give a little bit of an illusion of a shine, hopefully. So I've mapped in the black now. So I'm going to go in with the Pablo's black and then balance everything back out again. So just mainly going into the middle here, darkening up as much as I need to. I might need to adjust a little bit later on, but you can see that really does add. Just makes it a little bit richer. Right, looking at my spots and things, what needs to be adjusted here. So the double one there, and then this area, I'm going to add a little bit more of the burnt ochre into this section. I'm going to connect these two spots. Once you've got the black in, you can kind of see where needs adjusting. So I'm just going to connect those two, break up that edge a little bit. And the other thing is, until you've got your darkest areas in, it's hard to know how dark you need to go. So I'm going to use some of that black, remember I said it smudges, to create a shadow in between here. That's what I want. Clean the end of your nib before you move on. And then I'm going to use this black to create a shadow just underneath this one. And a bit of that black to kind of join them together. It's going to pick up a little bit of that pigment. It's going to be quite subtle. Same in here, just to make sure that they are connected. And then the lines there, a little bit in between them. And then darkening up closer to the body, or closer to the head I should say, down here. And then I can add some burnt ochre lines into the lightest parts. You can just start to see the illusion of fur texture. You can see I haven't really done this until the end. Just softening the pencil strokes here. Okay, now we can bring in the slice tool. And in the lighter parts, we can just break up some of the lighter parts and go over the top of the dark areas of fur. Break up that shadowed section. Just make sure that you're not going all in the same direction. You're going in the same vague direction, but you want to kind of crisscross your fur a little bit to try and make it a bit more random. What you'll find if you do like a little crisscross is that you'll end up with a natural V, which is like a clump. It just looks a lot more natural. So some of them I'm going a little bit more down and some of them I'm going a little bit more up, kind of changing as I go. Just breaking up this pencil. And what you'll find is because you've got that layer of luminance underneath, it scrapes back really nicely. You can just feel it, it's really lovely, and it adds to the texture going into the black a little bit, blowing away any fallout, and there you go, there's your next section complete. And then we'll move on piece by piece. I'm just going to zoom out so you're going to see it as a whole. So at the moment that just looks like a really weird random piece of fur, but hopefully if I zoom out you'll be able to see. As I zoom out on my leopard, you'll see that it starts to kind of make sense as it all comes together. Just working on the neck. Obviously I've left a little bit of a gap there. Just wanted to pick something that was making a little bit of sense. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy it and would like to see more videos like this, please don't forget to like and subscribe and turn that bell notification on so you're reminded of future videos. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.